Okay, welcome to another episode of Dirt Cheap Daily. In this episode, I'm trying to figure out the best way to remove RTV from aluminum. So these are the three ways we're going to be trying to get RTV off in this video. So here in the center we have our first way of getting RTV off, which is what I've been using, just a razor blades and then a razor blade holder to be able to make it a straight edge, and you just scrape off all the old RTV. Now that works great, but it takes forever, and so the main point of this video is to see what other ways are available and which ones work the fastest. So one of the suggestions I had was to grab some brass brushes. You can use other brushes, but since I'm taking RTV off of aluminum, I'm only going to be using brass because brass is softer than aluminum. The guy that suggested it said use WD-40 with your brass brushes as a lubricant, and it makes the RTV come off really easily. And that sounds really promising, so we're going to try that one. The last method we're going to try is something I've known about for a long time, and I just haven't ever bothered looking into it further. It is a roll-lock bristle disc. They're mainly three different colored bristles. You have green ones, yellow ones, and white ones. And that's the order from toughest to softest. So the green ones are the toughest, yellow is mid, and white is the softest grade. And so I bought the white to see if it's safe to use on aluminum. If it scratches the aluminum up, I'm going to stop using it. But hopefully it will be soft enough that I can use it on aluminum. So for anybody who is unfamiliar with a roll-lock disc, this is what it looks like. It's just a plastic disc, and then these little fibers can kind of move around and brush off. It's also contoured so that it can contour to all kinds of different shapes. And really, I'm really excited to see how this works out. I've been wanting to pick one up for a long time, and this gives me a really good excuse to go for it. So this is the rear timing cover off of my Subaru H6 EZ30R engine. It is the backside of it that you're seeing, and this is what mates up to the engine block. There's four main passageways that get RTV'd to seal it up. There's no gaskets or anything, but those are the four main places that I'm trying to scrape the RTV off. Now there's also the front cover, which kind of presses up against it and seals a bunch of oil in between these two sandwich plates, and that has tons of RTV on it as well. And so the back side of this also has RTV all over the place. The first one I'm going to try is my brass bristles and WD-40. Okay, I don't know how effective that really is. I think it would be more effective of just getting little tiny chunks off. So if I took a razor blade to this and took off most of the big chunks, I think this would work pretty well to just kind of go over it one last time before you're done with it. But it is kind of a fail for getting big chunks of RTV off. So now let's try the roll-lock bristle. So before I actually use this, I'm going to go ahead and try just right here. This is a non-mating surface, and I'm going to see if it scuffs up the aluminum too harshly. So if you take a closer look at that, it looks like it's not really doing that much damage. So I'm going to go ahead and keep using it and see if we can get some good results with it. Okay, that is also not working that well, so I think what I'm going to have to do is take a razor blade to all the big chunks, and then we'll come back again and try the roll-lock disc and the brass bristle once I have the main bulk of it taken apart. The bulk of everything is cleaned off, so I'm going to go ahead and try the brass bristle brush again. Okay, so I'm gonna have to spend a lot more time getting all the rest of the RTV off of that, but that's about all I'm gonna film. So based on that kind of quick test, I think the best way to remove RTV is with a razor blade, unfortunately. Yes, it takes a really long time, but it is the most thorough, and it's really the only one that worked well at removing the extra chunks that kind of squeeze out from between the two pieces you're RTVing together. Now, I did appreciate the roll-lock disc. It worked pretty well, and it did a pretty fair job of removing some of the larger chunks once I'd already gone around and kind of scuffed them up with my razor blade. The brass bristle brush was not as effective as I'd hoped. It did do a really good job of prepping the surface in preparation for more RTV sealer in the future, and so I'll give it credit for that. But probably I wouldn't really rely too much on the brass bristle brush when you're looking to remove a lot of RTV sealer. One thing that was surprising in all of this was the role that WD-40 played in getting the RTV sealer off pretty well. I don't know if there's anything really special about WD-40 about breaking up the RTV. I think it was more just the lubricating properties of it, that as I went at the RTV with just my razor blade, the excess WD-40 was able to kind of slip underneath it and just kind of keep everything lubed up nicely. That's something I wasn't expecting to find with this test, but WD-40 does work pretty well to help kind of facilitate the removal process. Now, I don't know if I would spray down the front end of my engine with WD-40, but it's something to think about if you're needing to do this. So I do have to admit that just a scraper and a razor blade is your best friend when removing RTV. Now, that's unfortunate to say because it's really the slowest way, but it does the best job of getting everything off and making the surface really smooth. Now, before I figured out these scraper tools, I used to just use a razor blade by itself, but these scraper tools make your job a whole lot easier. It really makes it so you can keep the razor blade flat up against the metal and scrape off all the RTV. If you're just using a razor blade with your hand, sometimes you can be off and it doesn't do as well of getting all the RTV off. This really helps. You can push down on it and get a lot of leverage on it that way and just scrape off the RTV in one shot. I was really impressed with even just this Harbor Freight special. This came in this little kit from Harbor Freight. It was 89 cents. So it came with a larger box cutter, one of these little X-Acto knife box cutters, and then this scraper, which they call a glass scraper. You do want to pick up an extra pack of blades because you're going to go through them a lot. Just the little bit that I did just now, it scuffed up the blade edge, and while it's still sharp, there's divots all along it, and I can already tell where it's leaving kind of a line in the metal because there's a gap in the blade, and so it's just not taking off 100% of the RTV. So that's something to be aware of. If you're taking off a lot of RTV, you're going to need a few razor blades, and I would say at least 5 or 10, because I went through a lot. Granted, I've done this a whole lot of times on this same car and this same piece of metal, and so I've gone through more razor blades than anybody should have to for one part. But that's something to remember. Pick up extra blades and really go look for a glass scraper because it makes your life a whole lot easier. Okay, there is one other way that I found. Now this is a couple weeks after I filmed that last bit, and I have a new engine that I have to get all of the RTV off of. And so since I have so much extra RTV to scrape off, this is the OEM RTV, and so it comes off a lot easier than new stuff. And because they used like the perfect amount, there's not any extra, this is a lot easier to get off. But when you're working with parts that you've put on and taken off a few times, the RTV usually kind of gobs up and is new, and so it's harder to get off. And anyway, I went ahead and ordered this Permatex gasket remover. This is for RTV silicone, and it's a dissolver. This stuff does not work on non-silicone based RTV or anything like that. And supposedly it's supposed to, you spread it on and then it'll wipe off all the RTV after 5 minutes of letting it sit. So we're going to try that. Now the instructions do say to remove heavy silicone residue beforehand. This says to use one of those safe scrapers. It's just a plastic Permatex scraper, but I've been using razor blades, which is fine as long as you're careful. So most of the RTV on here, because it's a factory RTV job, it's going to be very thin. So right here, I mean, you can see a little chunk right there, but there is a little bit of RTV residue around the whole thing. So I'm going to spray this off really quick to degrease it, and then we're going to go ahead and try some of this RTV silicone dissolver. Alright, so we're going to do this to two areas. to try it out. We're going to do it on this oil pump region, which is very thin. I mean, there's some there, but it's a very thin amount. And then there is a little bit of chunky right here. We're also going to try it around on this side, which has a little bit thicker RTV, as you can see. Now, this does say that it is a eye and skin irritant, so use gloves when you're using it. So, oh. Wow, that's really jelly. Mostly just like a big booger. I don't know if that's normal or not, because this is the first time I've ever used this stuff. But we'll see. Oh yeah, it's jelly. If somebody has used this before, please comment and tell me if it was Jello for you, because I'm wondering if this is just bad. So now we'll let that sit for 5 minutes. While I'm waiting, I'm gonna go ahead and squeeze some right on here. This seems super weird. So this stuff is flammable as well. If you get it on your skin, wash it for 15 minutes. Same within your eyes. Spread liberally on surface and let stand for several minutes to soften gasket material. You know what? I think this stuff is going to be a bust. I don't think this was worth it. This was like 13 bucks on Amazon. I couldn't find it anywhere locally. If this stuff is a miracle, it seems like they would offer it locally a lot more often. But this kind of thing just looks like a booger that smells really bad. But we'll see. Okay, it's been 5 minutes, so we are going to see what this has done to the RTV. I don't really think it has done that much, but we'll see. Nothing. Didn't do anything. Got like... Yeah, I didn't do anything. Let's look over here. Okay, so right through here I put it on, and right down here I put it on. And I mean, it didn't do anything to the thick stuff. Well, let's see if it did anything to this right here. Absolutely nothing. Well, good to know, huh? This stuff doesn't do jack. Unless I got a bad container, I don't know. Somebody please comment if you've used this stuff before, if it's supposed to be jelly. I feel like it's not. And that might be the issue I'm having. Anyway, it still turns out that razor blades are still your best friend when it comes to getting RTV off. That's a real bummer, you know? RTV sucks. As much as it sucks that this doesn't just dissolve away all the RTV and you still have to use razor blades, it's not something you have to do all the time. And so, as much as it sucks, it's a short-term sucking. Anyway, that's it. Save yourself some money and buy a bunch of razor blades for cheap. Permatex does offer a safety scraper, or a safer scraper. It's just a plastic scraper that basically is just a plastic razor blade. And that works pretty well. Razor blades are cheaper, so I do razor blades and I just be careful to not scratch the aluminum. So, get yourself a big pack of razor blades and get to work, because that's all there is to it. There's no shortcut with this, unfortunately. So yeah, that's Dirt Cheap Daily.